Chapter 19. Classified. Toothless slowly, almost flippantly, rolled to his feet, keeping his lime-green eyes on the intruder. In all likelihood, the title of intruder fell on he and Hiccup. There was a very good chance they had trespassed on the territory of the dragon now tensely approaching him. It slunk low to the ground, moving in a slow crawl used to stalk prey. Toothless kept his guard up as well, but otherwise watched impassively as the dragon came to him. The dragon across from him was almost absent of color, a stark contrast to his own sable scales. The long fangs protruding from either side of the top lip bore indelible streaks of yellow and orange from centuries of hunting. Spikes fanned around its head, nearly in similar length to its fangs, and flowed in two sets down its spine. Its body had to have been at least as big as his own from nose to tail. Probably bigger, if he were to be honest with himself. Okay, most definitely bigger, but not by much. Toothless filed away more and more details as it pressed in its advance. Though physically larger than him, the wingspan appeared shorter than his own, and given the number of protrusions on his body, it was guaranteed to be slower than him. The neck was longer, but only just. Its claws extended farther than his as well, better for digging into ground and pushing off. So more agility on the ground than he was naturally gifted with. Physicalities such as these usually gave a challenger an advantage in a grounded fight, but its limbs were leaner, and Toothless could see that it had less muscle tone on its forelegs. It did not look to have been in many recent fights, judging by the lack of blemishes on its body. It probably ate all its competition years ago. Toothless just realized the color of its eyes, a pale gold, when the scent hit him. This was a female. His ear fins tucked back as he finally took on a more actively defensive posture. Territorial males were one thing, but if she had eggs somewhere in the area, then he and Hiccup could be in serious trouble. Protective females were more dangerous than any creature he had ever encountered. "That's enough!" He barked by way of command, and surprisingly, she stopped. She still stayed low, belly to the ground and spike-laden tail swinging side to side in agitation.
"Who are you?"
Her voice was guttural, older sounding than he would have guessed, and it spurred him into scrutinizing her scales further. They were not white of age, but he would not be surprised if they soon lost their prime sheen. "Tat-give-give-gak," he clipped, wanting to get down to business. "Is this your land?" And had she run into Hiccup yet? She didn't smell of him, and there were no bloodstains, so Toothless could only assume the human was safe for now. His gut instinct told him much the same. The dragoness didn't answer at first, now sniffing at him. A paw rose as though she planned on taking a step further. Toothless released a warning snarl, and she shrunk back. He was starting to suspect that she was not with eggs or hatchlings, going by her relatively calm behavior at his presence.
"A human in dragon skin?"
she prompted curiously, continuing to scent what she could from him. "Was your eggshell made of cotton?" Toothless growled. "I'm a dragon." The dragoness huffed and snarled. The impudence of such an intruder deserved her enmity first.
"You smell of human," she snapped, "and one of your kind is never seen in the light."
"And you smell of ignorance," he rejoined, not bothering to acknowledge her familiarity with his kind. "What do you want?" Her eyes slid further, a harsh noise emanating from her throat.
"Do not dare provoke me on my own land, flippant hatchling. Be thankful I have not yet ripped the undersized scales from your hide."
"Are you challenging me?" Toothless barked back in a short laugh. "You clearly have no survival instinct to do such a thing."
"It is you who lacks instinct if you think a cripple stands a chance against me."
So she had noticed. Toothless's lip curled, revealing his smaller but no less deadly teeth. "I don't need flight to enter lesser dragons such as you." Her back arched to create a dome of barbs, and long claws curled into the ground, ready to spring as she gnashed.
"You need a lesson in humility."
Toothless prepared himself too, knowing he'd have to use his agility and sleek build to avoid those spikes at every offensive maneuver she performed. Before either could make a move, a new presence joined them, preceded by the noise of a smaller body moving through brush and the distinct scent of man. "Toothless? What are you—" Much like any beast in such a situation, the dragoness switched angles and went for the human. Toothless barreled into her side a second later, catching her mid-air and slamming her into the ground with all the power of his body. He sprang back right after as her tail lashed up at him. Hiccup's cry of "Whoa!" hardly reached his ears. He was just content with keeping her attention away from the boy. Righting at once, the dragoness charged him. She kept her head low so that her victim would get the brunt of her spiked crown, a tactic that would have worked for a slower target, but only served to take her eyes off of him. Toothless vaulted over her, just narrowly missing her maneuver of jerking her head up with impaling intents. He spun in the dirt upon landing and head-butted her smooth side. One of the advantages of having a shorter, stockier neck was the ability to power cranial attacks with less risk to the body. She lost footing for a moment, perhaps feeling so much resentment at being bested twice by the other dragon that she did not hear Hiccup's cheering in Toothless' favor. The dragoness pounced a third time, and Toothless reared up on his hind legs to bash her head to the side with his forepaw, knocking her well off course and causing her body to slam into the ground hard enough to raise dust. She was left slithering a couple paces back to shake her head clear, and Toothless simply had to take that moment to revel at his strength. He knew he was strong. Any dragon with an ounce of pride would never say differently of itself, but he hadn't realized how much more powerfully enabled carrying Hiccup had made him. Though unused to fighting in such a manner, his shoulder and wing muscles had bulked to the point of empowering nearly crippling blows, something most of his kind weren't built for, not in a ground fight. He purred. The dragoness recovered quickly enough for having her brains rattled and, more incensed than ever, reared up to match his two-legged stance, claws extended to their fullest. For a suspended moment, the two dragons swiped at each other. Toothless may have had the more powerful legs, but she had the stronger claws, and his scales were quickly littered with tears. In a split decision, Toothless dropped and launched forward, biting at her briefly exposed underbelly. He managed to nip at the skin, perhaps breaking it, but in the next moment she flew backwards like a cat bared to water. Hiccup stuck close to a tree, standing partially behind it in a weak act of shielding himself. "What's going on?" he asked, feeling safe enough to keep the whole left half of his body open. Suddenly reminded of the human present, the thing that originally set her off, the dragoness made another dash towards him. Toothless leapt between her and Hiccup, just making it in time and swiping at her head. She jumped back, succeeding in avoiding another painful blow. Her eyes lingered on Toothless's mighty forelegs, and realized, perhaps, that he was physically stronger than her, despite his smaller size and youth. His kind was revered for their mystery, even among the dragon populace, and it was possible she had misjudged his capability. Still, she could not condone behavior such as this, especially not his interference in her dealing with the scaleless creature behind him.
"Human!"
the dragoness screeched, her chest heaved and her nostrils flared.
"Of the same scent, and you protect it?"
Toothless snorted at the dramatics and ignored his stinging legs. "Yes, I protect him. It's a male," he blandly informed the stranger before tossing over his shoulder. "We have a visitor, as you can see. I will take care of this. You stay behind the tree." Hiccup's only response was to repeat under his breath, "It's a male." The dragoness appeared torn between killing the annoying young intruder and his human and indulging her curiosity over such a companionship.
"This is your human?"
"Yes."
"I had not realized they could be kept as companions,"
she stated. She sounded as though she was making conversation, but the aggression in her body language did not lessen. Her pride was wounded in their short tussle, and she would not soon forget it. "It's not easy," Toothless conceded to her comment.
"I think I know this one,"
Hiccup suddenly said from behind him.
"I saw it in the dragon manual."
Toothless was both annoyed that Hiccup refused to remain unobtrusive and grateful to at least have him out of the female's reach.
"He speaks the language of Norse."
The dragoness sounded truly surprised at this.
"It is very rare around here. He is far from his birthplace, is he not?"
"Yes, I took him away from it," Toothless said absently. He took a moment to glance behind him. Hiccup had stepped further away from the tree, observing the dragoness through half-lidded eyes. The fool put more focus into thinking than safety.
"The name isn't really coming to me," Hiccup said aloud. "I want to say saber-tooth driver dragon, but something's off." "Is he referring to me?"
the dragoness hissed, affronted, and no longer allowing curiosity to stay her hostility.
"I am an Akuta Kustos, you foolish human."
And then, as though for Toothless's own amusement, Hiccup punched a fist into his palm, looking inordinately pleased with himself, and declared,
"Oh, it's a white dragon."
"Insolence!"
the dragon screamed, looking ready to plow through Toothless to get to the boy. Toothless spread his wings out, showing off their impressive span, and let out a long hiss, letting her know she was not to attempt such a thing. "He can't hear you. He's a human," he said in Hiccup's defense.
"Am I pissing it off?"
Hiccup asked with a slight wince. He stepped back behind the tree.
Yes,
the two dragons replied back, though only one was conveyed. Toothless added, "And she refers to herself as an Akatakustos." He gave the self-declared Akatakustos a look, as though to say, "Are you happy?" She did, in fact, look happier.
"Oh, sorry."
Hiccup apologized to the dragoness. He looked at Toothless.
"Is she here to attack us?"
"So she claims."
this is my territory.
She drew herself up to her full height, puffing out her chest regally.
I reserve the right to kill trespassers.
"I didn't sense any markings," Toothless argued. "Nor does your scent permeate the area. You know, I don't think we are on your land." He landed an accusing eye on her bleached hide. To her credit, she did not look abashed.
I had not gotten around to this area yet, but in due time.
"I can't really remember anything I read about these. I think the dragon manual said that she likes silk."
Both dragons stopped their bickering and turned their eyes to the human partially muttering from the tree. Hiccup had his hand to his chin with minimal attention on the current situation as he racked his brain for some long-forgotten information.
"So you could lure her with... No, wait. Blowing air into her eyes will poison... No, poisons... No, that's the wrong one. What was it that the manual said?"
Toothless fought the urge to turn his back to the female so he could wallop Hiccup into silence. He was not helping anything. "Well, the human manual said banishment results in a diminished survival instinct," he retorted sharply, willing the boy to just stop drawing attention to himself. Hiccup's jaw dropped and unthinkingly shouted,
"There's a human manual?"
Toothless ended up taking his eye off the female after all, just so he could knock his head against the ground. "No, you gullible idiot, but if there was it wouldn't be very flattering." Hiccup rubbed the back of his neck, looking, and most likely feeling, rather foolish. He stepped fully behind the tree and out of sight, much to Toothless's satisfaction.
"Yeah, I knew that."
Hiccup's disembodied voice rang falsely. "I really cannot believe you said that," Toothless deadpanned. He glanced at the female, who had her head cocked in interest. She had probably never encountered a dragon manual before. They were more popular in the north and had only been around for a couple hundred roving spells, as far as he knew.
"Hey,"
Hiccup sounded chagrined.
"if we have one of you, then it's possible there's one of us."
"We can't write, and yours isn't even accurate."
"Well, neither is yours."
There was a long pause in which Toothless imagined Hiccup slapping his forehead several times. The boy eventually added,
"If it existed."
"Don't speculate about my non-existent manual."
"I don't have to. It's inaccurate. If it existed, that is."
"But it doesn't, so it is accurate." This made no sense.
"But if it did, you could amend it to include all the awesome things you learned about me as a human, to make it more accurate."
Toothless had no idea how things spiraled into this.
That's just too easy."
"Yes, I don't even know where to start."
"Sorry about that. I'm not really on my game today."
"It's fine. You were in the sun longer than usual."
"I know you like a challenge."
"We'll try again tomorrow."
Excuse me,
the dragoness huffed.
It is one thing to encroach on my territory, but to ignore me for a game of insipid human dialect.
Toothless snapped his teeth at her. "If you really insist on dying today, by all means, keep irritating me. I can easily dine on your tart flesh this night." A strangled noise emerged from the tree, and Toothless mentally rolled his eyes, a gesture he hardly ever did before he surrounded himself with two-leggers. "Or we can just call a temporary non-aggression pact and agree to ignore each other for the time being," he amended. The dragoness looked at him as though he had sprouted fur.
Are you too coward to kill me, or simply afraid of death?"
Toothless offered her a flat stare for the suggestion. "It's not that," he assured her. "My companion considers violence of any kind needless, and would never forgive me if I killed you for such a trivial reason."
"Trivial?"
The dragoness turned wide, amber eyes to the tree, smelling of human.
"Pride and ownership are no such trivial matters. Most would argue that death over a lush land is pride."
Toothless nodded sympathetically, for the first time feeling in agreement with the dragoness. I try to explain it to him, but it must be a human concept. From what I gather, humans would be much more willing to die over a female's purity."
"That is simply nonsensical."
"I know,"
I suddenly feel like I need to defend my species,
Hiccup announced loudly. "I'd say more than just your species needs defending," Toothless quipped over his shoulder.
"Yes?"
"You are the strangest dragon I have ever met."
The dragoness clanked with no indication on whether it was a compliment or insult. Her demeanor had subdued much since their fight, and now she regarded him with a different look, an unplaceable look.
"You speak as a human."
Toothless flared his nostrils. "I do not." Fearing he could not accurately assess his own speech pattern, he deferred to Hiccup. "Do I speak like a human?"
"Sounds human to me,"
Hiccup said, reading as entirely impassive. "What the hell do you know?"
"What the hell do you know? You don't have to listen to you. I do."
"That doesn't even make sense."
"I will allow you and the human to spend one night on these lands untouched, and expect you to be gone by morning,"
the dragoness announced, ceasing what was sure to be another inane conversation between dragon and human. She stared at the black dragon for a moment, as though considering something.
"However, I will allow you to remain an entire moon cycle if you couple with me. My heat is arriving soon, and I feel you would sire interesting hatchlings."
Toothless grunted, not knowing whether to be complimented or not. It was more likely he was the only dragon around these parts. "It is not yet the season for my kind." He didn't know how he would react to another species of dragon, and he wasn't due for another mating yen until 7 more resting spells. At least, he assumed so. He feared the demon had thrown off his cycle.
"Season for what?"
the tree asked. "Nothing." If only Hiccup could understand the female. The boy would be falling over himself at her frankness. The dragoness took the rebuff in stride.
"That is your pity,"
she commented. Without another word in parting, she turned to the direction from whence she came and took off to the sky. Toothless noted, with some happiness, that she wasn't as slow in flight as he originally thought. She was much slower.
"Season for what?"
Hiccup asked again as he sidled up next to him. Toothless turned to the human, who busily brushed bark from the seat of his pants where he leaned against a tree. "Did you get food?" Hiccup blinked at the sudden subject change and looked down at his empty hands.
"No."
"Go back in there."
"But
you said stupid things, more than usual, so you have to feed us." And Hiccup found he couldn't argue with that logic, because he had said an inordinate amount of stupid things.
"Fine."
Hiccup sighed, though it sounded more like a pant. The boy wiped a good deal of sweat from his forehead with his arm and set to task. Watching the reddened neck and back of Hiccup disappear into the cooler shade, Toothless realized that perhaps extreme heats humans were unaccustomed to could be unhealthy, and, subsequently, affect the rationality. He decided he needed to keep his human from ever overheating again, which reminded him, "And cut your hair."
"No." Chief of Burke and Council, this is a warning issued through my inability to put my past completely behind me. Given my unique position and understanding of dragons, I can act as a liaison between humans and dragons. Like it or not, I have discovered more about the nature of dragons than in all the last several generations of Burke. I should start this letter by addressing the hardest matter to swallow, the reason for the war. Pardon my blunt deliverance, but there is a demon within the dragon's nest which controls the dragons and forces them to steal food from nearby settlements to feed it. Please heed my warning and do not search for the nest anymore. From what I have gathered, it is physically impossible for a human to reach it. I realize it is a great thing I ask of you, and all I can do is offer my suggestion for the next raid to lessen the demon's attack force. The demon's control over the dragons has boundaries. I do not know the specific boundaries, but I do know that Raven Point is at least free of it. That is how I gained the gratitude of the Night Fury. My suggestion is to try and knock the dragons out of the zone of control. It may take more force than the common arm strength of the Vikings, so I also suggest using specialized weapons for the task. My bola launcher is one such example, if you haven't burned it along with whatever else I left. If you get the dragons out of this zone, I am almost certain that it will be the last you see of them. It would also deal a blow to the demon's personal army. The more it is fed, the more power she holds, and that, I think, should be a high priority in ensuring your village's safety. Let me remind you that this is simply what I gathered from the combined minds of myself and the Night Fury, an immensely intelligent dragon, if you'll believe me. Nothing we have is entirely concrete. I am continuing my research on the matter and hope to one day return to deal with the demon personally. Optimistically, this will end the raids. I am not asking for your participation, just your cooperation until the matter is settled. I have done nothing to earn your trust, and everything to warrant your scorn, but I implore you to at least consider the truth behind my words, and I beg you to ignore the natural impulse to rebuff me and think of what is best for the village. This war is going to end someday. I will make sure of it. Still alive, Hiccup.
Well, Spiteloud said, tossing the letter on the table after being the last to read it. It's good to know he hasn't gone feral. Gobber barked out a laugh, and a couple of other men chuckled, but Stoic remained stony. Not once as the letter was passed through hands did his eyes leave the parchment. "Oh, the malarkey," Hork shouted. "He sounds downright smock in this, he does." "I'd say more reserved condescension," Gobber suggested. "It's the same thing," Egg deadpanned. Stoic stroked his beard, ignoring his men's banter as he zeroed in on the very letter his son had been holding within a month of this date. Hiccup was almost so formal in his letters. Granted, there were only two, and almost completely devoid of personality. Not the one Stoic remembered, anyway. It could have been a cover, this detachment, almost like Hiccup shielded himself from his former clan. Was he treating them as a potential enemy? Yes, he was. As much as it pained Stoic, he also felt a small, despised surge of pride. His son had some good sense in him, some survivalist attitude buried deep down in there. He had to, if he was still alive after all this time. Though having a devil bewitch him demonstrated the weakest of spirits. That is, if that happened at all. The way Hiccup posed the letter made it seem like it was he who bewitched the devil, not the other way around. Stoic found he would much prefer that. Not only would it put his son, former son, in a stronger light, but he found he couldn't swallow the thought of the opposite, that those devils had the intelligence to control humans into writing such formal letters. This would indicate far too much intelligence lurking in their sinister bodies for him to be comfortable with. "What say you, Stoic?" Spiteloud asked over Hork and Gobber's razzing. He stared at his brother's face with the usual gruff, jutted jaw, but Stoic could make out the questioning and concern behind those dark irises. The other men present all turned their stares to him. "I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm at a loss." Rarely did Stoic admit any weakness, but this was a matter so serious he felt he had to be completely candid with his men. This was a decision that had to be handled appropriately, a decision he couldn't make on his own. A decision that would affect their entire community, possibly for years to come. "Centuries of experience have taught us that it might be very well impossible to find the nest. How many hundreds of years have we spent searching for it? We located its approximate position, but we can never quite reach it." "Bewitched it is," Gobber muttered, and a couple other men nodded with murmurs. "I believe that part, at least, of Hiccup's letter checks out. I vote that we—" Stoic took a breath. "We cease our searches of the nest. Temporarily." The men present should have seen it coming. He gave them enough headway, but it didn't stop the dubious mumbles that rippled across the table. If you're sure, then I'll second it, Gobber announced, throwing up a beefy hand with careless abandon. He looked to his fellows. He's right. Nothing ever comes of these hunts but broken ships and lost lives. The reminder of the consequence of every failure had other hands joining the original pair. Then what do we do? Spitloud spoke up. Do we simply wait for each dragon raid? I know searching might indeed be futile, but you can't honestly expect us to sit here and do nothing. Well, that leads us to the next order of address, don't it? Gobber suggested, turning to Stoic. Those boundaries, this demon. Stoic shook his head. That is something I have a harder time believing. It would suggest dragons are not what we thought them to be, Ack murmured. There's no way centuries of studying the beasts could prove false. Hork fired up. There's just no way. Demon or not, they're still dangerous. Even if we do hit him out of bounds, they could still turn around and attack us. What if they're worse without this control? Many of those present looked alarmed at the thought. Gobber was less moved. Hitchups seem to get along with the Night Fury well enough to ride it. They're supposed to be the most aggressive. Silence reigned for a moment. We know nearly nothing about Night Furies. There had been no contact with them before, Spitloud remarked reasonably. Gobber shrugged. Maybe we know less than we think about other dragons too. But we have had contact with them before. All right, enough. This isn't getting us anywhere. We're still going to defend what's ours, no matter what the letter says, Stoic declared, and the thought that they were still going to fight the devils heartened many of the men. Regardless of why they're doing it, we're still being attacked. Knock them out of this zone if you must. We could even set up a squadron of individuals to do so, but predominantly, we fight. Aye! Thank the gods. Don't know what I'd do with myself otherwise. What if he's right? Ack asked quietly to Stoic, his voice falling under some of the more rowdy cheers. What if it is time we ended this war? Hearing him due to close proximity, Hork butted in before Stoic could think on it. Fighting dragons is what we do. It's what we've done for generations. It defines us as Vikings, he stated impressively. His naturally loud voice returned all attention to the chief and his close company. Not all Vikings fight dragons, Ack pointed out. Maybe it's time we start adapting to a new lifestyle. We can't adapt to anything so long as they're still attacking us, Hork countered. If Hiccup does return to defeat the demon, if this theory of control does prove right, we'll have to, Gobber added. Hork looked frustrated. Then should we even let this happen? Maybe we should keep things as is. It's familiar, and tradition, at least. Gobber opened his mouth, for the first time appearing wound up. Stoic laid a heavy hand on his shoulder. I understand what you're trying to say, he said to Hork, and he knew, unfortunately, many of Berk's inhabitants shared Hork's sentiments. Believe me, I want to uphold tradition as much as any other chief to oversee this island. But the truth is Berk's not going to last much longer. The hall had fallen unusually quiet, all wanting to hear this truth from the mouth of their leader. Stoic tried to meet each set of eyes as he delivered the harsh reality that had crept up on them. The number of dragons has grown, as has the number of people on this island compared to food, and both are causing us to run through resources faster and faster each year. We simply can't continue to live as we have. It was the duty of each overseeing family to govern more than just rules. They had to control needs and means. They tried to keep the population contained. Contraceptive herbs were commonly found in any household, but it was hard to find a balance for families. Sickness and a harsh living demanded more children for insurance. They needed future warriors, but too many led to this problem. With how fast they went through capitals, augmented exponentially by the thievery of the dragons, they were going to burn out within the next century. Logically, eliminating this war with dragons would prove to be the most beneficial course of action in the long run. Unfortunately, Vikings weren't known for thinking long-term. So where does that lead us? Spitloud pushed, not a man to leave things open-ended. He wanted a concise decision, no matter its favor. Do we believe this? He slapped the letter with the back of his hand. Why else would you send it? Hiccup was never malicious. He was a good kid. Gobber struck up. He looked around those gathered with hard eyes as though daring someone to say different. "He left," a voice called from out of his sight. "He'll come back, he said so himself, didn't he? What if he did this all for us?" Gobber was looking at Stoic as he said this. This was a message to a still grieving father. "He didn't have to inform us of anything. He could have left and never looked back. It sounds like he's well enough off. But he did. It could have been the plan all along." Stoic did his utmost not to look nearly as wrenched as he felt, not in front of his men. "I would love to believe that, Gobber. You know I would. Anything for some redemption for his family. But we can't afford to be that naive." Maybe Gobber could afford to have that kind of unbridled faith in people, but Gobber wasn't the chief, was he? Stoic heaved a sigh, knowing a solid statement had to be made. "Whether or not Hiccup returns, whether or not we see this war end in our lifetime, the reality is we are still in a war now. We need to be prepared for change, but fight as we've always fought, with the resilient, unyielding pride of a Viking." The hall rang with cheers, even with only the trusted present. Stoic maintained his hard face, encouraging the moral he had set, but knowing this was only delaying the inevitable. There was still too much in question. A more solid decision could be made if they weren't left to so much speculation. They could have taken one of the more domesticated dragons from the arena to test the theory of boundaries and controlled behavior had they still been there. The dragons in the arena were killed well over a year ago, within the same day Stoic learned of his son's betrayal, one after another. Each slaughter more gruesome than the next, each drawing a larger and larger cheering crowd. At the time, it both served to strengthen the loyalty of his clan had for him and reminded them of his pure physical prowess. He was chief, and there was no better dragon killer than he. Though a dragon at their disposal sure would be useful now, he did not regret killing them. He didn't think he'd ever forgive that species for taking his son from him, responsibility be damned. Replenishing the dragon arena could move onto the agenda. It would soon have to start grooming the next chieftain, and with no son at his side, it would be his brother's by default, even if Snotlout left much to be desired in a chief. The lad had the image going for him, but it took more than brawn to run a village. Not to say that the future would mirror the young man he knew today. The boy was still maturing and had many years before the passing of leadership would be necessary. He could make it work. There was always one other idea, a thought that niggled at the back of Stoic's mind on and off over the past year, the sort of idea that worried him, the idea of change. He was a man of tradition, he did not like change. But perhaps it was time to change the dynamic of their leadership. Perhaps they should start picking their leaders through sheer skill and popularity over birthright. That young girl, Astrid Hofferson, she had capability and command to spare. Despite the hard spell she hit after the death of her mother, the people still admired her. She had weeded out the traitor, chased him off, cleansed their village, and not even Stoic could fault her for her actions. It would be unorthodox, certainly, but maybe he could somehow convince Gritstone and Spitelout to arrange a marriage between their children. Astrid would certainly take charge in that relationship, hopefully, anyway, considering how pig-headed Snotlout could be, and it would be a semi-transition into his idea of skill over birthright. Stoic shook his head, realizing he was getting ahead of himself. Now was not the time to be thinking of changing even more things about their lifestyle, not when their very culture was on the line. His eyes strayed to the half-curled ladder, forgotten and unassuming. Change was dangerous. Change was not a plague he should burden his already struggling village with. It was just an idea, after all.